Welcome back, everyone. Oz here, and today I've got some r/EntitledPeople for you all. As per usual, I'll be reading the post, giving you my opinions at the end, and I hope you do the same down in the comments below. And without further ado, let's jump right into it. Zhao Saffler. Kneecapped a Karen in front of a cop. This happened several years ago when I worked as a construction project manager for a company that served retail point-of-sale systems. The job was for everything, from adding or removing a register to installing all of the electronics in a newly constructed store. One year, I took a camping/off-road vacation in a remote area, and was supposed to meet some friends. They called me to inform me they were about 6 hours late. Since I knew some people at the local grocery store I had recently finished doing the IT remodeling for, I walked over to say hi. When I got there, I found that half of their front end was down. The manager asked if I could help, and since I was just killing time, I told him yeah, if my boss approved the overtime. Anyone who worked in the field was paid hourly. The overtime was approved, and it quickly became apparent that the issue was that the cleaning contractor had dismantled registers, violating their contract the night before to make it easier to clean. I was able to fix all but 2 lanes, and those had damaged power and data cables. I told the manager I could fix them with parts from the local True Value and Radio Shack if he would reimburse me. I also asked if I could park my truck in the vendor-only spot, since his parking lot was full and I would need some tools I carried in my truck. He agreed, so I got my truck, picked up the items I needed, and parked in the vendor's spot. This is important. Both registers needed the cabinets dismantled in order to get to and replace the damaged cables. I fixed the first lane and got it operational. Then I moved to the second lane, which was right in front of the customer service desk. I made sure the closed sign was up, and had a 6-wheeled cart that was loaded with a special order placed to block the register. I was lying under the register belt in order to connect the new cables to the register base when someone kicked me. They kicked me again. So I lashed out with a steel-toed boot and hit a Karen in the knee, dropping her screaming, briefly, as she was knocked out when she hit her head on the cart she had moved. Oh. What happened was she decided that my lane should be open, moved the cart, tossed the closed sign on the floor, and kicked me for ignoring her. What she failed to notice was that there was a local cop at the customer service desk asking if they wanted the lifting truck in the vendor spot ticketed. The manager was directing him to where I was to see if it was mine, and they both saw the woman kicking me. The cop called an ambulance for Karen and then asked if I wanted to press charges, which I did. The store also pressed charges, as she had been banned and was violating a no trespassing order. She later pled guilty to the trespass and a misdemeanor assault charge after being informed that a police officer witnessed the attack and security camera recorded it. My employer's legal team informed me that I was being subpoenaed for a deposition, because she was suing both companies for compensation for me having broken her kneecap and giving her a concussion. A week later, I was told this was canceled, as the judge had dismissed the case with prejudice due to her having initiated the violence according to the police report. Who the fuck sees a closed lane with someone underneath the register doing active maintenance on it and just assumes, yeah, this is definitely in working order and I should totally go over here, drop my stuff off, and get their attention so they can check me out. They're not checking me out because their head's stuffed under a cabinet? Let me just kick them. I'm sure they'll be more than happy after I kick them several times to assist me with my transaction. Surely this would be the case, right? Or maybe it was a 400 IQ play that she knew that she was banned from the grocery store, and that by harassing an employee who was clearly busy, they would be too focused on returning to their work for them to even notice that she was banned. So thereby, she was actually using a massive high IQ play, but didn't realize she was fucking with someone who had steel-toed boots. Which, yeah, hurt like a motherfucker when you get kicked. I once made the awful mistake of playing shinsies with someone who was wearing a pair of steel-toe boots. Thankfully, they did not kick hard because of the fact that they were wearing steel-toed boots, but oh my god. Let me tell you what, the floor and I became very quickly acquainted in a very intimate manner once I got kicked in the shins with that. And no, it was not uncalled for. At the first place I worked, we had a toxic workplace environment that involved kicking each other in the shins and oh, that was a lawsuit waiting to happen. Lissy V. Dine and Dashers leave pregnant friend with the bill for 36 people. We were having dinner last Sunday night for my niece's birthday at a nice steakhouse. The table next to us was a huge party. I counted at least 36 people sat around a whole stack of tables all pushed together. The night went on. We had a lovely dinner and noticed that the people at the big table were drifting off in small groups. Nothing unusual. As we were finishing up, there was a lady screaming and crying at the register at the front, heavily pregnant. She was having an absolute meltdown. We got the gossip from a waitress a bit later. Turns out, everyone who left prior to her had told her that they would pay for their meals and drinks separately on the way out. It's very common in Australia to split the bill like that. They then apparently told the cashier that they'd given their portion of the bill to a friend who would pay at the end of the night. All good. Except they did neither. She got to the cashier at the end of the night and was presented with a bill for several $1,000s for steaks, desserts, drinks, etc. Hence the meltdown. She was in such a state that the manager called an ambulance for her. When we left, her partner was screaming down the phone at someone to get their fucking ass back to the restaurant and pay their bill, or they would never see him, her, or their baby ever again. I was so sad for them. It looked like a bunch of close friends and family having a celebration night out. Who does this sort of thing to someone they care about? Seriously. Like, what did they think was going to happen? The couple would just suck it up and pay? Like, wow. First of all, this is a situation where she should go no contact until they pay her back and then some. Because this is actually ghoul behavior. I'm also genuinely curious why it's not common practice in more places when someone tells you, oh, this person's picking up the bill for me, not to just go and verify with that person beforehand so you don't have someone who's just dining and dashing and dropping a bill onto someone's shoulders. I feel like that should be more common practice, but I suppose maybe it's not? Because the restaurant/fast food place that I worked at, you would pay up front, because it's just one of those places. And I've never personally been in a situation where I've either had a friend pawn their meal off onto me or I pawned a meal off onto them, so I've never had to have that kind of conversation with the waitstaff. So to me, it just seems like it would make more sense that if you tell the waitstaff, oh no, this table over here or my friend is going to be covering the meal, that they would be like, okay, cool, let me verify that first real quick, before actually just simply accepting someone at face value, because I don't know, it feels like this would be a really common scam tactic. I mean, hell, this was a plot point in Dumb and Dumber. The logistics of preventing dine and dashing aside, I struggle to comprehend what kind of person you would need to be to essentially pawn your $100+ dinner onto your pregnant family member or friend. Because this also had to have been orchestrated for every member of the party to all pawn their meal off onto one specific person. Like, there has to be a reason for that level of cruelty. Like, it really comes down to everyone agreed to do something ghoulish for no reason, for shits and giggles, or it just happened to be a coincidence, or they orchestrated this as some sort of, like, fucked up punishment. And the restaurant 100% made the right choice to call an ambulance in this situation, because if she was heavily pregnant and put under this kind of stress, it worries me. Silent Ability 2338. Coworker got mad at me when I caught him stealing my tips and said something. So, for context, I work at a small-town pizza place. Each final bill is usually somewhere between $20 to $40, so the tips aren't amazing. But hey, there's still something. Overall, I like my job and the people I work with the exception of this one guy, who we'll call Caleb. On his very first day a few weeks ago, Caleb came in high out of his mind and ended up getting sent home. Everyone has bad days, so whatever. But, like, at least come able to work on day one. He's training to serve, and I was working with him and the trainer this past Monday. I had a table of a few of my regulars who always leave me a $5 bill. I said my "have a good night" and all that, watched them put in the little bill sleeve, and walked off to attend another table. I come back to start bussing after they leave, and the tip is gone. I immediately tell the manager that someone took my tip, and he goes to ask Caleb. Caleb, without saying anything, pulls the $5 from his apron and hands it to the manager, with a scowl. The audacity itself was one thing, but I was just glad to have the money back, so I ignored it, and was more diligent about watching my tables for the rest of the night. Later, right before I clock out, Caleb comes up to me, and while walking past me says, "You didn't have to say anything, bitch." You have got to be kidding. Told the manager again, I'm not one to deal with that. Anyway, he called out 2 days ago and said his phone was broken, so he couldn't come to work, and called out today saying he forgot and had plans. I don't think he will have a job to call out of soon, or at least I hope so. God, what is this kid, 16? Like, good God, dude. Like, this definitely gives the vibe of like a 16-year-old who doesn't really give a shit during school and is bringing the same energy to their first job that their parents made them get. That would be my guess. I had to work with a couple people like this, and oh my God, it is frustrating. Fuck, that was almost 8 years ago now. Like, I remember as a 16-year-old having to tell other 16-year-olds my age what to do, and there is definitely a massive power imbalance that begins to blossom just right then and there. And like, you can definitely tell which teenagers are there to actually make money because they want to have spending cash, and which ones were forced to get a job because their parents made them to. And it is a night and day difference, and Caleb is definitely one of those people. Hubert, 73. Someone tried to get me fired for existing. Back in the early 2000s, I was the IT manager for a small company. In May of one year, I hired Robin, the first female in our department. She was a church friend of one of my team, and he recommended her. I made sure she met the other team members and gave them time without me present. I not only got his feedback, I made sure she had a good vibe from him before I hired her. Everyone got along and things were running smoothly for several months. The Friday before Thanksgiving, we had a company get-together and everyone's spouses came. That's when Robin met my husband. I left on Saturday for a 2-week vacation, and when I got back, my boss called me before I even boot up my computer and asked me to come to his office. While I was gone, Robin accused me of sexual harassment. HR did their investigation and said they could find no evidence of it because it never happened, but offered to transfer her to another department and she declined. Then she said I was an incompetent manager. My style was to assign projects based on people's skills or interests, or let them decide amongst themselves who was going to do what if it wasn't specific. The other two people in the department loved the freedom and trust. Robin apparently did not. My boss said she couldn't point out any specific requests she made that I was unresponsive to, nor could she think of any time I singled her out or treated her differently. The fact I wasn't micromanaging her made me a bad manager in her eyes. My boss told her that might be new for her, but that was how he managed too, and he had never heard anyone complain about being trusted too much or given too much freedom. He suggested she tell me that she needed more oversight. She said she wasn't comfortable having that conversation, so he offered to do it for her. That's when she said she couldn't work with me because I'm gay. My boss asked her if I said or did anything inappropriate, and she said no. In fact, prior to meeting my husband, she thought I was talking about a roommate when I referred to him. Homosexuality was against her religious beliefs, and she never would have taken the job had she known. My presence created a hostile work environment for her, so he had to fire me. She was also outraged that my boss dared to call himself a Christian and would accept someone so blatantly sinful. My boss told her to get over it or quit because he was not firing me over her religious beliefs. She quit. When I got back to my desk, the guy who recommended her said she started stirring stuff up at church, trying to get him thrown out of the congregation since he knew I was gay. He said the church had several lesbian and gay members and never said anything negative about homosexuality, so he was surprised at her stance. The preacher asked her not to come back. I was blown away by Robin's sense of entitlement. She thought her being an evangelical Christian meant she got to dictate who a company could hire or who could attend a church. I was thankful that everyone, my boss, HR, my team, and even an unknown preacher, had my back. It always breaks my heart when extremists give members of religion a bad name. I mean, the same thing goes from those of the Muslim faith, the Jewish faith, Christian faith. I mean, honestly, every religion has their bad apples, and it's a damn shame they drag everyone else down with it. That shit sucks, man. Because then you run into circumstances where, because of those few bad apples, it actually creates and fosters hate for a specific religion and others because their most memorable interactions with people of that faith are mostly negative. And the worst part is, the most negative and hateful people of that faith are also the most vocal that they support that faith. So you end in a position where every interaction where someone who hates you for being you very clearly identifies who they are and puts a bad taste in your mouth for that specific type of person. I mean, hell, Robin was trying to get them fired for sexual harassment charges. Like, dude, you know the guy likes dick. He's just not that into you. And she was still trying to go for that. Foreign story, 8127. Karen angry that I snapped at her kid after said kid screamed into my ear. First, hi, thanks for having me here. So this happened a few years ago at a major airport in the US. I worked as a pilot for an airline, and in the course of my duties, I ride our aircraft to or from home to our crew base. I often did this out of uniform, with my only identifying feature being my work ID or lanyard. My last flight before time off put us on the ground around noon. Being off duty, I immediately changed out of my uniform and took a seat from the gate where my flight home would depart from. Behind me, there was a rambunctious child that was using the seats as her personal playground and randomly squealing and screaming while doing so. While this is annoying and the squeals are like nails on a chalkboard to me, it's the reality of things. I just ignore it and browse through my tablet. Next thing I know, I catch a full scream into my ear. I turn my head and the kid is literally a couple of centimeters from my face and is hanging off the back of my chair. I immediately snapped at the kid, "Do not scream into my ear." That is when the Karen mother, who was just letting this happen, loses her shit. She darts up, standing over the seat behind me, yelling, "Don't you yell at my kid, how dare you!" The kid, meanwhile, has a shocked look, but settles down and goes silent. Karen continues on, trying to goad me into arguing with her, and doing everything but actually putting hands on me to escalate this into a physical fight. She even tries to encourage her kid to scream again, to which the kid just sat there quietly. I initially stared at her for a few seconds, then went back to ignoring her and the situation and go back to looking at my tablet. She continues having a meltdown of one for 10 minutes before the man with her collected her, the kid, their things, and went elsewhere. I feel bad for the kid, as I cannot see her future ending well with that sort of guidance. It was also a shame that the mother flipped, as I likely would have given the kid wings that my company supplies us with after the kid calmed down. Like, I understand the reaction to want to, protect your kid, even if they're in the wrong, because some parents do have the logic of, no one else can punish my kid except for me, so how dare you yell at them? But, you kind of lose your ability to have that authority over punishment when your child is essentially turning an entire area into a personal jungle gym and risking hearing loss for your average airport goer. I don't know, see, I always grew up with the notion that it's socially taboo to yell at someone else's kid even if they're in the wrong. I wonder if that's the case more frequently in the world, or if I just grew up in kind of a weird, isolated pocket and picked up on things that weren't exclusive to the rest of the world. So I'd be curious, is it socially acceptable to yell at someone else's children? If so, are there certain, limitations? You can't just yell at them for everything, there's gotta be, specific thresholds they breach. Or are you just kind of in the mindset of, it's on site. The first moment you get to yell at a child where you're not socially in the wrong, you're gonna take it. I'm pretty curious because recently we had a story of a child taking a handful of wedding cake and eating it and getting yelled at by someone, well, specifically the bride. And that circumstance is one where it definitely, despite my own upbringing, I feel it is valid to yell at the kid. But I would definitely be curious, what thresholds do you have for yelling at children in public that are not yours? Suzanne Salty Seas. No dirty hippies allowed in first class. Flying entitled Karen. Well, folks, it's that time. Me traveling to and fro Costa Rica, getting treated to seeing crazy entitlement around flying. Flying used to be rare and fancy. Now it's just a flying bus. Oh boy, did I see lots of it. But this one kind of took the cake. The other day, I had a 4-hour international flight to get home. I'd already booked a business class seat. Larger seat equals more comfort instead of being squished together like sardines in the main cabin. When I went to pre-board, the gate agent told me she'd move me further forward. Okay, cool beans, thank you. They wheeled my disabled ass to the door of the plane and I discovered I was now sitting in first class. Score. I love first class, but it's usually prohibitively expensive, so I rarely buy a first class ticket. The only other person pre-boarding in a wheelchair is sitting just in front of me in first class, and I had just watched her make a huge production of getting aboard, crying, whining, and yelling. I sense she's a tad dramatic because she's only got an over-the-counter, not-so-supportive knee support on. No crutches or cane, nothing medical issue that you'd get with a serious knee injury or disease, but whatever, people are entitled to be as weird as they want to be. Once regular boarding started, I got to see my seatmate for the flight, a man with a magnificent quiff of chestnut hair, in a man bun and a large beard. He was dressed in old shorts and an old stained tee. I'd watch folks looking like they bathed in hand sanitizer giving him wide berth and a variety of not friendly looks in the airport waiting room. I'd seen how they were treating him and thought I loved to know his story, so lo and behold, he's sitting with me, just behind yelling knee lady. We settle in, and over wine we start talking. He's a federal military retiree, just like my husband, and he's traveling around the world, going places that strike his fancy with merely a backpack. We're having a good conversation with a bit of laughing thrown in, but we're speaking at regular conversation level. Not loudly at all. We've only been airborne for 30 minutes or so when knee lady starts yelling for the flight attendants to move myself and this gentleman because, her reasoning, we were dirty hippies who didn't belong in first class. He and I are looking at each other and laughing at that. We're both post-60. Yes, he's dressed very casually, but is clean and doesn't smell. I'm wearing an outfit of linen tunic printed in an Ital fabric. Black pants and Birkin socks. This is an outfit that one of my kids teases me, makes me look like I'm on my way to teach yoga in Connecticut. Sort of alternative, sort of suburban upper-class lady. Thankfully, the flight attendant had a lot of common sense, telling knee lady that she's not moving us anywhere, but she'll ask us to pipe down if that helps knee lady. We both smiled at the attendant and that she didn't even have to ask. We'll be more quiet. Lunch followed by a nap. When we arrived in Costa Rica, I got to see a jetway Jesus experience as yelling knee lady was suddenly able to walk without much trouble once her suitcase arrived. I just had to laugh at that as the guys at the airport pushed me out of my car. I swear I feel so sorry for everyone having to deal with folks like this. That definitely had to have been her first time in first class. My guess would be is that she probably got accommodations because of her injury, was also shuffled into first class, and then kind of got a little bit too comfortable with the position she was in. Every now and then, if I know that I'm going to go on a trip, I'll oftentimes buy miles with the airline that I oftentimes will use, just so that way I can upgrade to first class at a massive discount. You should definitely try that. If your airline lets you buy miles, you should definitely check to see if you can upgrade your seats with miles, because it's worth it. Granted, I haven't done that in almost a year, so they may have patched that exploit. But I pretty much figured that out entirely by accident the first time that I started actively flying on my own as an adult, and realized like, oh, I can upgrade my thing with miles. And then I realized on the website there was a buy miles option. I think the reason why they offered that was so you could buy miles and get into their rewards program. But I realized very quickly I could just buy miles and save like $200 or $300 on first class. So yeah, Bowiified. Aunt I've barely spoken to in the last 20 years wanted my sister and I to use our inheritance to buy her a house. I had suffered through a holiday recently with my aunt. I put up with her presence so I could get to know my cousin better, which in turn made me annoyed all over again about something she did a few years ago. My mother killed herself in 2020. As a consequence of this, my sister and I received a large inheritance from our grandfather's estate. Mother's father, obviously. Enough to buy a house with. My dad sorted out the details of the taxes we had to pay on the inheritance for us. We offered him a third share to take care of himself, but he stated he didn't want to touch the money. The aunt, who I went on holiday with, and we'll call her Rachel, is an avowed socialist, while the other aunt, who we'll call Tilly, has led a hippie lifestyle for decades. They're both in their 60s and are my dad's sisters. I did do some snooping into the user's Reddit history because I was deathly curious if this was a European definition of socialism or an American definition of socialism, because they have very, very different definitions depending on what country you're in. In this instance, they are European. Anyways, because their chosen lifestyle, they don't have much in the way of savings, but they're adults. They chose their lifestyle and they have to live with the consequences of that. A year or two after my mother killed herself, Tilly had some sort of crisis where her rent increased and she wasn't sure how she was going to be able to afford her place and accommodation. I'm not sure of all the details. What I do know is Rachel reached out to my dad, not to my sister or I, but my dad, with the suggestion that we use our inheritance, which we inherited from the other side of the family, our mom's side, to buy Tilly a house, which she would then leave to us in her will. So I would have to wait until my middle age to get access to my own money to buy a house with. This is a person we've barely spoken to in the last 20 years. The audacity of this was absolutely amazing, and made the holiday even more annoying as I feel certain their attempts to get close to us have partly to do with our money. Now, Rachel's behavior on the holiday was also pretty irritating, asking inappropriately personal questions. Were you close with your mom? Like, what the fuck? acting childishly upset because we were late to events she wanted to go to, etc. It set my sister and I arguing as well, so we're 100% never going to a holiday with her again. Honestly, the most egregious part is someone from the other side of the family asking for inheritance for someone they probably barely even knew. That is really fucked up. Now, while I do not agree with this line of logic, I can follow the line of logic of like, oh, wait a minute, maybe I can fix my current situation by having them help me. I get a house. I leave them the house in my will. That house goes up in value. So therefore, everyone wins. Now, just because I can follow the logic does not mean I agree with it for like the second time, because that's really bad logic. And incredibly selfish to prey upon your nieces and nephews' mothers and the inheritance they receive. Hey, welcome to the outro. Don't forget this whole thing is basically brought to you by GamerSupps. If you like caffeine, then I can't recommend GamerSupps enough. Use code Oz at checkout to support the channel. And I do actually use this product. It's replaced all other sources of caffeine for me because I feel good. It doesn't have any of that extra stuff that a pre-workout blend might have. It's with a couple of the extra things to make it so you don't crash as hard. It's good. I like it. Personally, if you really want a good flavor, try the Soda Pressing Pear or even the Dragon Fruit Punch. Those two are my personal favorites right now.